Look at your hands for a second. Really look at them. Because somewhere inside the cells beneath that skin, buried in a stretch of DNA so ancient it predates every language, every empire, every border drawn on any map, there is something that does not fully belong to our species. Not a disease, not an error, a gift. A gift from a group of humans who walked this earth for hundreds of thousands of years and then vanished, leaving almost nothing behind except a handful of bone fragments in a cave and a quiet thread of genetic code that survived inside the people they met, loved, and had children with. If you have Asian ancestry, East Asian, Southeast Asian, South Asian, Tibetan, or any blend of the above, the odds are very good that you are one of those people. Scientists have now confirmed what the DNA has been quietly saying for years. The Denisovans did not disappear without a trace. They disappeared into us. And the evidence of that is sitting right now inside your own genome, doing things, shaping you, protecting you in ways that took researchers decades to understand. This is not ancient history in the distant sense. This is your history. And what scientists have found inside it is stranger, older, and more remarkable than almost anyone expected. Most people who take an ancestry test get back a pie chart, a tidy little breakdown of percentages, this much from here, that much from there, clean categories, familiar labels. And if you have Asian ancestry, the test might tell you something about regional populations, migration patterns, lineages that stretch back a few thousand years. What it will almost certainly not tell you is that a portion of what you carry does not come from Homo sapiens at all. Not in the way we usually mean. Buried inside the genomes of people across East Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and into the Pacific, scientists have identified stretches of DNA that trace back not to any modern human population, but to the Denisovans, an entirely separate human lineage that split from our ancestral line hundreds of thousands of years ago. They were not a myth. They were not a subspecies in the vague, hand-wavy sense. They were a distinct population of humans, deeply different from us genetically, who lived across an enormous range of Asia for an almost incomprehensible span of time. And when our ancestors finally crossed paths with them, something happened that left a permanent mark. The encounter was written into the genome. And for people with Asian ancestry, that writing is still there. Not as a curiosity, not as a footnote, as living, functional DNA that is still doing its job inside you right now. In 2008, archaeologists excavating a cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia pulled something out of the dirt that looked almost insignificant, a fragment of a finger bone. The tip of a pinky, belonging to a child, small enough to hold between two fingers. So fragmentary, it told researchers almost nothing about what the creature looked like, how tall it stood, or how it lived. But it contained something the cave had preserved for tens of thousands of years: DNA. And when a team led by Swedish evolutionary geneticist Svante Pääbo sequenced that DNA and published their findings in 2010, the scientific world stopped cold. The bone did not belong to a Neanderthal. It did not belong to a modern human. It belonged to something else entirely, a previously unknown branch of the human family tree that had never been named, never been described, never been suspected. They called them Denisovans, after the cave, where the finger was found. Denisova Cave. A remote site in southern Siberia that 3 different kinds of humans, Denisovans, Neanderthals, and eventually our own ancestors, had apparently all called home at different points in time. The discovery was so significant, so foundational to our understanding of human evolution, that Svante Pääbo was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2022 for his work sequencing ancient hominin DNA, an entire branch of humanity, found in a child's fingertip. That is where this story begins. Here is the strange thing about the Denisovans. Even now, after years of research, after a Nobel Prize, after thousands of scientific papers, we still do not know what they looked like. We have no complete skeleton, no skull to reconstruct, no face to put to the name. What we have is a finger bone, a few teeth, a jawbone, some scattered fragments, and an enormous amount of DNA. And from that DNA, scientists have had to piece together an entire people. What the genetics tell us is that the Denisovans were widespread across Asia in a way that staggers the imagination. They were not confined to one cave in Siberia. A jawbone identified through ancient protein analysis was found in Baishia Karst Cave on the Tibetan Plateau, more than 160,000 years old, sitting at 3,280 meters above sea level. A tooth turned up in a cave in Laos, placing them in Southeast Asia for the first time. And in 2025, researchers confirmed that a jawbone recovered from the seabed off the coast of Taiwan also belonged to a Denisovan, extending their known range deep into East Asia, cold Siberian highlands. The roof of the world. Tropical Southeast Asia. The edges of the Pacific. These were not a small, isolated group clinging to one corner of the continent. They were people who had mastered an entire hemisphere. They roamed it for hundreds of thousands of years, and somewhere along the way, they met us. The meeting did not happen once. That is the part that surprises almost everyone when they first hear it. For a long time, the working assumption was simple. Modern humans migrated out of Africa, crossed paths with Denisovans somewhere in Asia, interbred once, and moved on. Clean, linear, easy to picture. The truth is messier and far more interesting. Geneticists now have strong evidence for at least 2 distinct waves of Denisovan interbreeding with modern humans, happening in different places, at different times, with different Denisovan populations. Research published by Sharon Browning and colleagues at the University of Washington identified these 2 separate pulses. One wave left its mark primarily in the ancestors of people now living across East Asia. A second, distinct wave contributed to the ancestry of populations in Southeast Asia, the Pacific Islands, Papua New Guinea, and Australia. And there are hints that additional contact events may have occurred even later than researchers initially thought. Some models suggest interbreeding as recently as 44,000 to 54,000 years ago, with at least one Denisovan lineage possibly surviving long enough to encounter modern humans moving through Southeast Asia tens of thousands of years after that first contact. What this means is that the Denisovan DNA sitting inside people with Asian ancestry today did not arrive in a single moment from a single source. It arrived in waves from multiple populations of Denisovans spread across an enormous territory who encountered our ancestors again and again across thousands of years and thousands of miles. Now, here's where the story stops being abstract and starts being almost impossible to believe. Because the Denisovan DNA that survived inside Asian populations did not just survive passively, like a fossil sitting inert in the code. Some of it got selected for. Some of it was so useful, so precisely suited to the environments modern humans were moving into, that natural selection grabbed it and held on. And the single most dramatic example of this is sitting right now in the bodies of tens of millions of people living on the Tibetan Plateau. The Tibetan Plateau averages more than 3,500 meters above sea level. The air there holds significantly less oxygen than at sea level. For most humans, living at that altitude long-term causes serious physiological problems: thickened blood, increased risk of pregnancy, complications, cardiovascular strain. But Tibetans handle it with a biological ease that has puzzled scientists for decades. The answer, confirmed in a landmark 2014 study published in Nature, is a gene called EPAS1. This gene regulates how the body responds to low oxygen environments. And the Tibetan version of EPAS1 is so genetically unusual, so different from the version carried by every other human population on Earth, that researchers determined it could only have one explanation. It came from the Denisovans. That specific EPAS1 variant is found in roughly 80 to 86% of Tibetans. It is found at very low frequency in Han Chinese, and it is found in essentially no one else on the planet. The Denisovans have been living at altitude for over 160,000 years before modern humans arrived. They had already solved the problem, and when they met the ancestors of Tibetans, they passed the solution forward. The altitude gene is the most famous example, but it is nowhere near the only one, because when researchers began mapping Denisovan DNA across modern Asian genomes in detail, they kept finding the same pattern. The fragments that survived were not random leftovers. They clustered around specific categories of genes, and one category kept appearing more than almost any other: immune system genes. The human immune system is one of the most complex biological machines ever produced by evolution. It has to recognize an almost unlimited variety of pathogens, distinguish them from the body's own cells, and mount a precise response all in real time, without a manual. A critical part of that system is controlled by a family of genes called HLA genes, the human leukocyte antigen system. These genes help the immune system identify foreign invaders. And here is the thing about HLA genes: the more variety a population carries, the better equipped it is to handle a wider range of pathogens. When modern humans first arrived in Asia, they were entering environments full of diseases their immune systems had never encountered. The Denisovans had been living in those environments for hundreds of thousands of years. Their immune systems had already been shaped by that exposure, and when interbreeding occurred, modern humans inherited some of that hard-won immune experience. A 2011 study published in Science identified specific Denisovan HLA variants that are now extremely common across Asian and other Eurasian populations. One variant in particular, HLA-A x 11, is abundant across modern Asian populations and provides immune protection against certain strains of Epstein-Barr virus. More recently, researchers mapping the largest collection of Denisovan inherited DNA ever assembled identified 3,127 active genetic variants inherited from Denisovans that are still functioning in the immune systems of people alive. Today, the Denisovans are gone, but their immune memory is still fighting inside you. Before we get to the final piece of this, and this last part is the one that reframes everything, one thing worth mentioning. Everything we have covered so far, the altitude gene, the immune variants, the multiple waves of interbreeding, all of it is traceable inside your own raw DNA data. If you have already done an Ancestry or 23andMe test, you are sitting on more information than the results page is showing you. Over at the OriginDNA website, I put together a 3-volume PDF guide bundle that shows you exactly how to read your raw data, find archaic ancestry signals, and uncover the deeper origin stories that the standard reports never surface. Link is in the description. But do not go yet. What comes next is the part most people completely miss. Because the Denisovan legacy in Asian DNA is not limited to 2 or 3 famous genes. When researchers scan the full genomes of East Asian, Southeast Asian, and South Asian populations, the Denisovan fingerprints turn up in a remarkably wide range of biological systems. There are signals in genes related to metabolism and how the body processes energy at different altitudes and temperatures. There are traces in genes connected to skin biology and cold adaptation. There are variants that appear to influence how certain populations respond to specific infections and environmental pressures. Each of these is a small window into an ancient world. Each one is a moment of contact between 2 kinds of humans preserved in the only medium that lasts longer than bone. The Denisovans left no temples, no tools we can identify with certainty, no artwork on any cave wall that we have found. What they left was this: a library written inside the people they loved. So why does none of this show up on your ancestry report? If you have done a DNA test and you have Asian ancestry, you almost certainly carry some amount of Denisovan DNA. Researchers estimate that East Asians carry roughly 0.2 to 0.4% Denisovan ancestry in their genomes. Southeast Asian populations carry comparable amounts, and in some Pacific Island communities, the figure climbs dramatically higher, reaching 3 to 5% in Papua New Guinea and indigenous Australian populations. Those numbers might sound small, but small is relative when you are talking about a genome of 3 billion base pairs. Even a fraction of a percent translates to millions of individual DNA letters shaped by a different human lineage entirely. And yet, your ancestry report almost certainly says nothing about it. The reason comes down to how these tests are designed. Consumer ancestry tests work by comparing your DNA to databases of modern human reference populations. They are built to tell you which present-day populations you are most genetically similar to. They are not built to detect archaic hominin ancestry, which requires a completely different type of analysis, one that looks for long, unusual stretches of DNA that diverge sharply from any modern human sequence. Standard tests simply are not looking for that signal. They are not equipped to find it. So what the pie chart gives you is a surface reading. It tells you which modern populations your DNA resembles. It does not tell you about the deeper layers underneath the ancient contacts, the extinct lineages, the encounters that happened tens of thousands of years before any of those modern population categories even existed. The Denisovan chapter of your story is invisible to the test, but it is not invisible to the science. Here is something that will sit with you. The Denisovans were not gone long before your ancestors arrived. That is the assumption most people carry, that these were creatures of the deep past, vanished into geological time, separated from modern humans by an unbridgeable gulf of prehistory. The reality is far closer than that. Evidence from Baishia Karst Cave on the Tibetan Plateau shows that Denisovans were still living there between 48,000 and 32,000 years ago. That is the youngest Denisovan fossil ever found, and that date range overlaps almost exactly with the period when modern humans were actively spreading across Asia, moving into new territories, establishing the population lineages that would eventually become the ancestors of people living in China, Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia, and beyond. Some researchers have proposed, based on DNA segment length analysis in certain Southeast Asian populations, that interbreeding events may have occurred even more recently than that, possibly as late as 15,000 to 30,000 years ago. Though that specific claim remains debated among geneticists. What is not debated is the broader picture. The Denisovans and modern humans were contemporaries across Asia for a significant stretch of time. They were neighbors. They shared landscapes, competed for resources, and based on everything the genetics tells us, they sometimes chose each other. The children born from those encounters survived. Their descendants are alive today, and when you trace the Denisovan DNA in modern Asian genomes back through time, you are not reaching into some impossibly remote past. You are reaching back only a few thousand generations, close enough, in genetic terms, to almost touch. So let's bring this all the way back to you. Because everything we have covered, the finger bone in the Siberian cave, the 2 waves of interbreeding, the altitude gene in Tibetan blood, the immune variants still firing in Asian immune systems, the jawbone pulled from beneath the Taiwan Strait, the youngest Denisovan fossil overlapping in time with your own ancestral population, none of it is abstract. All of it points to the same conclusion. If you have Asian ancestry, you are not simply the product of one human story. You are the product of at least 2. Modern humans carried one line of history out of Africa and across the world. The Denisovans carried another, older line, forged across hundreds of thousands of years of living in some of the most extreme environments on Earth. And at some point, those 2 lines crossed. The children who came from that crossing were not diminished by it. They were equipped by it. They could breathe thinner air. They could fight pathogens their purely modern human cousins had never encountered. They carried biological tools, assembled across an enormous span of time by a people who had already solved problems that the newcomers had not yet faced. That inheritance did not disappear when the Denisovans did. It moved forward. It moved into the populations that spread across East Asia and Southeast Asia and into the Pacific. It moved through every generation between that first encounter and this moment, and it arrived here. Inside the genome of anyone watching this with Asian ancestry, you did not just inherit a nationality, or a culture, or a family name. You inherited the survival knowledge of an entire lost people. That is what the DNA has finally revealed. Look at your hands again. Same hands as before. But maybe you are seeing them differently now. Because those hands are built, in part, from instructions written by people who never knew your name, who lived and died tens of thousands of years before any civilization existed, who left no monuments and no written records and no artwork we have found. They left something quieter and more permanent than any of that. They left themselves. Threaded into the genome of every person who carries their legacy, the Denisovans achieved a kind of immortality that no conqueror ever managed to buy. Not in stone, not in gold, in living tissue. In the gene that lets a Tibetan child run at altitude where others struggle to breathe. In the immune variant that has been fighting infection in Asian bodies for 50,000 years. In the long, strange stretches of ancient code that consumer ancestry tests cannot see and history books have never mentioned. Science is only now learning how to read what they left behind. And what it is reading is not a footnote. It is not a curiosity. It is a chapter of your own story that nobody told you was there. The Denisovans did not vanish. They became part of you. And every time a researcher sequences another genome, every time another ancient fragment is pulled from the earth and identified, that story gets a little clearer, a little larger, a little more astonishing. You are not just human, you are human plus something older. And that older thing is still alive inside you right now.
Thanks for watching this video, but before you go, don't let your DNA results just sit there unanswered. Tap the link on the description to download your ebook and find out what your raw data is hiding.